The story opens with the bustling sound of machinery and the steady rhythm of hammers hitting steel. The scene is set at a large construction site located on the outskirts of a thriving American city. High-rise buildings are beginning to take shape. Towering cranes swing above as workers below move between piles of building materials, tools, and equipment. The project is massive, a multi-million-dollar commercial development that promises to reshape the skyline of the area and bring thousands of new jobs to the local community. It's a place full of potential, but also pressure. The worksite itself is meticulously organized, with different zones for various tasks. In one section, steel beams are being welded together. In another, concrete is being poured for the foundation of what will soon be a skyscraper. There's a sense of urgency among the workers, each fully aware of the looming deadlines. Despite the diversity in the workforce, men and women of different races, nationalities, and ages, there is an unspoken hierarchy that governs the place, as is often the case in such large-scale projects. The management team, consisting of engineers and supervisors, oversees the daily operations from an elevated trailer that sits near the entrance to the site. From this perch, they have a clear view of everything that's happening on the ground, but it's not just the technical aspects they're monitoring. Underneath the surface, a tension is brewing, a tension that speaks to more than just construction delays and budget overruns. Among the management team is Michael O'Brien, a seasoned engineer in his early 50s. With years of experience in the field, O'Brien has earned a reputation for being technically proficient, but his interpersonal skills leave much to be desired. He's known for his abrasive nature, and worse, there are rumors that his attitude towards certain workers, particularly those of different races, is less than professional. He carries himself with a sense of entitlement, his pale skin slightly flushed under the hot sun, often barking orders without much regard for the people carrying them out. His sharp blue eyes seem to assess people as much as tasks, always quick to critique but rarely to compliment. On this particular day, a new worker has joined the crew, a black man named James Carter. Carter is quiet and observant, keeping his head down and focusing on the job at hand. In his mid-30s, he has the muscular build of someone accustomed to hard labor, and his calm demeanor suggests experience, though he speaks little about himself. His dark skin glistens in the sun as he moves efficiently between tasks, drawing no unnecessary attention to himself. To the casual observer, he seems like just another worker, but there's something about his posture and the way he watches the interactions around him that suggests there's more to his story. As the day progresses, the disparity between workers and management becomes increasingly apparent. While the laborers toil under the hot sun, the engineers, O'Brien included, remain in the shade of the trailer, stepping out only to bark orders or offer a quick, critical glance at the progress. Among the workers, there's a shared understanding. Keep your head down, do your job, and try to avoid getting noticed, especially by O'Brien. But for Carter, staying unnoticed may not be an option for long. The stage is set for what will become a clash not just of personalities, but of deeper, more entrenched social dynamics. The construction site, with its layers of steel and concrete, is also a stage for power struggles and hidden prejudices where not everyone's role is what it seems. Michael O'Brien is not just any engineer. He's the lead on this project, a position that comes with both prestige and pressure. Standing at 6 feet 1 inch, his frame is imposing, though softened by years of a more sedentary lifestyle. His thinning blonde hair, now streaked with gray, often peeks out from beneath his hard hat, and his once sharp features have become slightly rounded, a testament to the comfort his position affords. O'Brien's walk is brisk, confident, almost aggressive, as if every step he takes needs to reaffirm his authority on the site. He has a reputation that precedes him, skilled, yes, but also arrogant and quick to judge, especially when it comes to those he deems beneath him. James Carter, on the other hand, couldn't be more different. While O'Brien is loud and commanding, Carter moves through the construction site like a shadow. At 6 feet 2 inches, he's taller than O'Brien, but his posture is more restrained, as if he's deliberately making himself smaller to avoid attention. His hands are calloused, a testament to years of manual labor, and his deep brown eyes are often hidden beneath the brim of his cap. Carter doesn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, his responses are measured and respectful. His work ethic is impeccable. He's always the first to arrive and the last to leave, completing his tasks without complaint. As the sun rises higher, beating down on the workers, O'Brien notices Carter for the first time. His eyes narrow as he watches Carter hoist a steel beam into place with ease. But there's something about the way Carter moves that seems to irritate him. Perhaps it's the quiet confidence or the efficiency with which Carter works. Regardless, O'Brien zeroes in on him. "Hey, you," O'Brien calls out, his voice cutting through the din of the work site. Carter looks up, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Yeah, you. What's your name?" "James Carter, sir," he replies, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You're new here, right?" "I don't remember seeing you before," O'Brien says, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Yes, sir. Just started this week." O'Brien sizes him up, as if deciding whether or not Carter deserves to be there. "You better keep up, Carter. I don't have time to babysit anyone, especially not someone like you," O'Brien adds, his words hanging in the air, heavy with implication. Carter nods silently, his face unreadable, and returns to his work. As the day goes on, O'Brien seems to find every excuse to hover around Carter, scrutinizing his every move. Whether it's the angle at which Carter is carrying a load or the speed at which he's working, O'Brien finds fault in it all. "You're not here to take your sweet time, Carter. We have deadlines to meet. You better start pulling your weight," he barks, though there's no real reason for his ire. Carter remains calm, his face impassive as he absorbs the criticism. He nods and continues with his tasks, never once raising his voice or questioning O'Brien's authority. But beneath the surface, a storm is brewing. The other workers have begun to notice the way O'Brien singles Carter out, and while no one says anything, the tension on the site becomes palpable. Every time O'Brien approaches Carter, the murmurs among the crew grow louder. One afternoon, while Carter is taking a brief break, sipping from his water bottle in the shade, O'Brien walks by and throws him a scathing look. "You think this is a vacation, Carter? You're not here to relax," he says, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'm just taking a 5-minute break, sir. Been working nonstop since morning," Carter replies, his tone respectful but firm. "Yeah? Well, I don't care. You don't get special treatment just because you think you can take it easy out here. Get back to work," O'Brien snaps, before walking away without waiting for a response. Carter clenches his jaw but says nothing. As he rises to return to his tasks, one of the older workers, a man named Luis, approaches him quietly. "Don't let him get to you, man," Luis says in a low voice. "He's always been like that. Just keep your head down, and he'll eventually move on." Carter nods, but inside, he knows this isn't something that will just move on. He can feel the eyes of the other workers on him, the unspoken question lingering in the air. Why him? Why does O'Brien have such a problem with him? As the week drags on, the dynamic between Carter and O'Brien continues to deteriorate. What started as mild annoyance on O'Brien's part has turned into outright hostility. Each interaction between them becomes more heated, with O'Brien pushing harder and Carter standing firm, refusing to let the engineer's words get under his skin. But even Carter knows that this can't go on forever. At some point, something will have to give. The construction site, once just a place of work, has become a battlefield where egos clash and hidden biases come to light. As the days stretch on, the tension between O'Brien and Carter becomes more noticeable to everyone on the site. O'Brien's behavior shifts from subtle disdain to open criticism, often calling Carter out in front of other workers for even the slightest of perceived mistakes. It starts with small comments, nitpicking over how Carter carries materials or the way he organizes his tools, but it escalates quickly into full-blown confrontations. O'Brien seems to be looking for any excuse to put Carter in his place, to remind him of who holds the power here. It all comes to a head one particularly grueling afternoon. The sun is beating down mercilessly, and the heat makes every task more difficult. The workers are visibly tired, but Carter remains focused, moving methodically as he helps guide a large steel beam into place. The crane operator above is carefully lowering the beam while Carter, along with 2 other workers, works to ensure it fits into position perfectly. Suddenly, O'Brien appears, striding toward them with a scowl on his face. "What the hell are you doing, Carter?" he yells, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. Carter glances up, momentarily confused. "We're positioning the beam, sir. It's almost in place." O'Brien steps closer, clearly looking for a confrontation. "Almost? Almost isn't good enough. We don't do almost on this site. Do you even know what you're doing?" The other workers exchange uneasy glances, stepping back slightly to avoid getting caught in the middle of the brewing storm. Carter, still calm, responds evenly, "Yes, sir. I've been doing this for a long time. We're being careful because the placement is critical." O'Brien's face reddens with frustration. "Don't tell me what's critical, Carter. I've been running projects like this long before you even knew how to swing a hammer. You're moving too slow. This whole crew is falling behind because of you." Carter pauses, taking a breath before replying. "We're moving at the pace necessary to ensure safety, sir. Rushing could lead to a mistake, and with something this heavy, that could be dangerous." O'Brien's eyes narrow, his voice lowering but laced with venom. "Don't you dare lecture me about safety. You're not paid to think. You're paid to do what you're told, and right now, you're wasting my time. If you can't keep up, maybe you should find another job, one that's more suited to your abilities." The implication in his words is clear, and everyone around them hears it. The air seems to thicken with the weight of what's just been said. A few of the workers nearby look away, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. Others stare at the ground, uncomfortable but silent. No one speaks up. Carter, still calm on the surface, feels the anger rising within him, but he forces it down. He knows that responding with aggression will only give O'Brien more ammunition. Instead, he straightens up, looking O'Brien directly in the eyes. "I'm here to do my job, just like everyone else, sir. If there's a problem with my work, I'm happy to correct it, but I don't appreciate being disrespected for no reason." O'Brien sneers, stepping even closer, his voice dripping with disdain. "No reason? You're lucky to even have a job here, Carter. There are a dozen other men who could do your work twice as fast, and without the attitude. So maybe you should start showing a little gratitude instead of running your mouth." The other workers can feel the situation teetering on the edge of something dangerous. One of the foremen, a man named Tom, approaches cautiously. "All right, let's all take a breath here. We've got a job to finish, and it's too damn hot to be standing around arguing," he says, trying to defuse the tension. O'Brien shoots Tom a look but says nothing, his fists clenched at his sides. Carter, too, remains silent, though the strain of holding back his frustration is evident in the set of his jaw. Without another word, O'Brien turns on his heel and stalks off, muttering under his breath. As soon as he's out of earshot, Tom places a hand on Carter's shoulder. "Don't let him get to you, James. He's always been like this, but today he seems particularly wound up. Just keep your head down, all right?" Carter nods but says nothing. The heat of the day and the weight of O'Brien's words hang over him, making it harder to focus. For the rest of the afternoon, the atmosphere on the site remains tense. Every time O'Brien walks by, his gaze lingers on Carter, as if waiting for him to slip up. By the end of the day, Carter is exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. The constant scrutiny, the thinly veiled insults, and the pressure to remain professional in the face of such blatant disrespect weigh heavily on him. As he gathers his things to leave, a few of his coworkers quietly offer their support. "Man, I don't know how you do it," one of them says, shaking his head. "O'Brien's got it out for you, and it's clear as day." Carter forces a small smile, but inside, he knows this is far from over. O'Brien's first attack may have been unprovoked, but it won't be the last. Something deeper is at play here, something that goes beyond the worksite. And while Carter has no intention of backing down, he knows that confronting O'Brien head-on is a dangerous game. The days that follow bring no relief. In fact, things only get worse. O'Brien seems to have made it his personal mission to single out Carter at every opportunity. What starts as petty remarks about his work soon escalates into full-on public humiliations. It becomes routine. O'Brien will find some minor issue, an insignificant delay in Carter's task or a perceived inefficiency, and use it as an excuse to berate him in front of the entire crew. Each time, the other workers try to keep their heads down, but it's impossible not to notice the cruelty in O'Brien's actions. One morning, As the crew gathers for their daily briefing, O'Brien's voice cuts through the usual chatter. "All right, listen up, everyone. We've got some real work to do today, so I need everyone on their game. Except maybe Carter. Seems like our friend here needs a little extra help understanding the basics." He shoots a smirk in Carter's direction, and a few nervous chuckles ripple through the group, though most remain silent. Carter stands at the back of the group, his face impassive as he absorbs the insult. He's used to this by now, but that doesn't make it any easier. He shifts his weight slightly, keeping his gaze on the ground, determined not to react. Reacting would only give O'Brien what he wants, another opportunity to pounce. As the crew disperses to their respective tasks, O'Brien follows Carter, finding excuses to linger near him throughout the morning. At one point, Carter is helping to unload a shipment of heavy materials, his muscles straining as he works alongside 3 other men to lift a massive steel panel into place. Just as they're about to secure the panel, O'Brien saunters over, his arms crossed over his chest. "Carter, you're doing it wrong. If you had half a brain, you'd know that's not how it's done. Are you trying to get someone hurt, or are you just that incompetent?" O'Brien says loudly, making sure everyone within earshot hears the reprimand. Carter wipes the sweat from his forehead, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're following the same process we've used every other time, sir. Everything's under control." O'Brien steps closer, his eyes blazing with anger. "Under control? You call this under control? You're a hazard, Carter. I don't care how long you've been doing this job, you don't know what you're doing, and I'm not about to let you screw this up." One of the other workers, a younger man named Dave, shifts uncomfortably beside Carter. He starts to speak, his voice quiet but firm. "Actually, we're doing it right, Mr. O'Brien. Carter knows what he's doing. We've been using this method since day one, and it's been working just fine." O'Brien spins around, glaring at Dave. "You've got something to say, kid? Because unless you want to end up like Carter, I suggest you keep your mouth shut and do your job." Dave swallows hard and backs off, his face flushing with embarrassment. Carter shoots him a small, grateful nod but remains silent. Inside, though, he feels a knot of frustration tighten in his chest. It's not just the insults anymore. It's the fact that O'Brien's cruelty is affecting the entire crew. No one feels safe speaking up, and the atmosphere on the site has grown increasingly toxic. Over the next few days, O'Brien's behavior becomes even more vindictive. He begins assigning Carter the dirtiest, most difficult tasks, jobs that no one else wants to do. While other workers rotate through different responsibilities, Carter is stuck doing backbreaking labor with little reprieve. It's clear that O'Brien is trying to break him down, to make him quit out of sheer exhaustion or frustration. One afternoon, as Carter works alone in a corner of the site, shoveling gravel in the blistering heat, O'Brien approaches again, this time with a sneer on his face. "How's it going down there, Carter? Enjoying yourself?" he asks mockingly. Carter pauses, resting on his shovel, and looks up at O'Brien. His face is expressionless, but his voice is steady. "I'm doing my job, sir." O'Brien laughs, a sharp, cruel sound. "Your job? You think this is what you were meant to do? You're nothing but a laborer, Carter, and you'll never be anything more than that. You don't have what it takes to be anything better. People like you? You should be grateful just to have a job at all." The words hit Carter harder than any physical blow could. For a moment, he feels his control slipping, feels the anger rising to the surface. But he forces it down, forces himself to stay calm. He can't afford to lose control. Not now, not in front of O'Brien. Instead of responding, he picks up his shovel and returns to his work, every muscle in his body tensing with the effort of holding back. O'Brien watches him for a moment longer, as if waiting for a reaction, but when none comes, he shakes his head and walks away. Carter continues to shovel, but inside, the frustration is building. He's not the only one who has noticed O'Brien's behavior. The other workers have begun to talk among themselves, whispering in the corners of the site about the injustice of it all. Some of them, like Dave, have tried to stand up for Carter, but O'Brien's authority is too intimidating. Everyone fears the same thing, that if they speak out, they'll be the next target. But Carter knows something they don't. He knows that O'Brien's time is running out. The more the engineer humiliates him, the more he reveals about his true character. And soon, O'Brien's arrogance will lead him to make a mistake that will change everything. For now, though, Carter waits. He waits and watches, his silence a weapon in itself. He knows that O'Brien's power is built on a foundation of insecurity and prejudice, and sooner or later, that foundation will crumble. When it does, Carter will be ready. The oppressive tension at the work site does not go unnoticed by the rest of the crew. O'Brien's increasingly hostile behavior toward Carter has become a source of unease among the workers. Although most remain silent, it's clear that many of them are uncomfortable with what they're witnessing. There's a growing sense of solidarity with Carter, though it remains mostly unspoken. Fear of retaliation, of losing their jobs, keeps their voices quiet. Carter's quiet endurance has earned him respect from many of his colleagues. Even those who don't directly engage with him can see the injustice unfolding. His work ethic is impeccable, his demeanor calm, and his refusal to rise to O'Brien's provocations only further emphasizes the stark difference between the two men. But this silent respect is laced with fear. Fear that if anyone steps up to defend Carter, they too will become a target of O'Brien's wrath. During the midday break, a small group of workers gathers under the limited shade provided by the construction trailers. Dave, the young man who had previously tried to defend Carter, sits with a few of the older workers. His face is still flushed with the memory of O'Brien's public dressing down. "This isn't right," Dave says quietly, glancing around to make sure O'Brien isn't within earshot. He's picking on Carter for no reason, and we all know it. Luis, one of the more seasoned laborers, shakes his head. "We've all seen it. Hell, O'Brien's been like this for years. It's worse now, though. Seems like he's got it out for Carter more than anyone else. But what can we do? You speak up, and you're next in line." Another worker, Jorge, who had been with the company for over a decade, nods solemnly. "I've seen guys like O'Brien come and go. They think they can get away with treating people like garbage because they're in charge. But people like that always slip up eventually. Carter's smart, though. He knows better than to get into it with O'Brien." Dave looks down, frustration simmering. It's just not right. Carter's one of the best guys we have, and O'Brien treats him like he's worthless. He's doing it because he can, because he knows we're too scared to say anything. Luis takes a deep breath, his weathered face lined with years of experience, both in construction and in dealing with difficult people. "You're not wrong, Dave, but this isn't just about Carter. It's about all of us. O'Brien's got power, and as long as we're afraid of losing our jobs, we're giving him more of it. But it's not that simple. We've all got families to feed." The men fall into a heavy silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Each of them knows what's happening is wrong, but the fear of retaliation keeps them in check. O'Brien's power over them doesn't just come from his position. It comes from the fact that, in an economy like this, jobs are scarce, and no one can afford to be out of work. Later that day, as the crew resumes work, the tension on the site is palpable. O'Brien's voice echoes across the construction zone, barking orders and criticizing anyone who crosses his path, but his focus remains squarely on Carter. The other workers glance at each other nervously each time O'Brien nears, wondering if today will be the day something finally snaps. As the afternoon drags on, Carter works silently, aware that all eyes are on him. His colleagues' support is there, but it's fragile. He can feel their sympathy, but he knows that sympathy won't stop O'Brien. Still, Carter draws strength from the fact that they see the injustice, even if they're not ready to speak out. He's not alone, even if it feels that way sometimes. At the end of the shift, as the workers pack up their tools and prepare to leave, a few of them linger near Carter, offering small gestures of solidarity. Dave approaches him, his face a mixture of frustration and concern. "Man, I don't know how you do it. I would have snapped by now if I were you." Carter smiles slightly, though there's a weariness behind his eyes. "It's not easy, but I've learned that people like O'Brien, they want a reaction. If I give him what he wants, he wins. And I'm not about to let that happen." Dave nods, clearly torn between admiration and the desire to do something more. "If you ever need anything, man. I mean, I know it's not much, but we're here for you." Carter pats Dave on the shoulder. "I appreciate that. Really, I do. But sometimes it's not about fighting back. Sometimes it's about waiting." O'Brien's going to hang himself with his own rope eventually. People like him always do. As Carter leaves the site that day, he feels the weight of the unspoken support from his colleagues. They're not ready to stand up to O'Brien, but he knows they're behind him in their own quiet way. It gives him a small measure of comfort, though he also knows that if O'Brien continues down this path, it won't just be Carter who suffers. This toxic environment will start to poison the entire crew. The days ahead are uncertain, but Carter remains resolute. He won't let O'Brien break him, and though his colleagues may not be able to speak up now, he senses that a tipping point is coming. O'Brien's arrogance, his need to assert his dominance, will eventually be his undoing. Carter just has to be patient and let the inevitable unfold. As the relentless tension on the construction site continues to build, it's only a matter of time before something snaps. O'Brien, with his overconfidence and focus on belittling Carter, starts to lose his grip on the details of the job. His need to assert control over the workers, particularly Carter, blinds him to the very real challenges of managing a project of this scale. And then, one afternoon, in the midst of a particularly grueling workday, O'Brien makes a crucial error, one that could have catastrophic consequences. The project has reached a critical phase. The steel framework of the building is nearing completion, and the next few days will involve lifting and securing some of the heaviest beams that will form the skeleton of the skyscraper. It's precise work, and any mistake could be disastrous. The crane operators need to be perfectly aligned with the crew on the ground, and every beam must be secured with precision. As the afternoon heat beats down, O'Brien stands on the platform overlooking the site, issuing orders with his usual arrogance. His focus is, as always, on maintaining his authority, and he frequently interrupts the crane operator and the ground crew with unnecessary corrections. Move it left, no, not that much. Pay attention. This isn't amateur hour. His voice is sharp, laced with impatience. Carter, working at a different section of the site, watches from a distance. He's seen this before. O'Brien, too absorbed in trying to assert his dominance over the team, losing track of the actual work. Carter has noticed something even more concerning. The calculations for the beam placement in this particular section seem off. The support columns, while sturdy, don't appear aligned with the specifications laid out in the original plans. It's a subtle mistake, one that might be missed by someone not paying close attention, but Carter's trained eye catches it immediately. He steps closer to get a better look, his heart sinking as he realizes the potential danger. If O'Brien continues with the current plan, the beams won't align correctly, and when the structure starts bearing weight, it could lead to a collapse. The stakes are incredibly high. Lives are on the line. Carter stands there for a moment, weighing his options. He could go to O'Brien directly, try to explain the mistake, but he knows how that conversation would end. O'Brien's disdain for him would only make him more defensive, more stubborn. And if Carter is publicly seen as questioning the engineer's judgment, the fallout could be even worse. But staying silent isn't an option either. This isn't just about him anymore. Everyone on this side is at risk if something goes wrong. O'Brien's voice rings out again, his frustration evident as the crane operator struggles to maneuver the beam into place. For God's sake, do you even know how to operate that thing? Get it together before we lose the whole damn day. Carter watches as O'Brien, in his frustration, overrides the original instructions and tells the crew to continue positioning the beam despite the clear misalignment. That's when Carter makes his decision. He approaches Tom, the foreman who had always been a quiet voice of reason on the site. Tom is standing a few feet away, observing the scene unfold with a worried expression. "Tom, we've got a problem," Carter says quietly but firmly. Tom turns to him, eyebrows raised. "What's up, Carter?" "The beams are off," Carter explains, keeping his voice low so as not to attract O'Brien's attention. "Look at the alignment. If they put that beam in place, it won't hold under the load. The calculations don't match the plans." Tom frowns, glancing at the steel framework in question. He's not an engineer, but he's been in construction long enough to trust his instincts, and Carter's concern is more than enough to make him take a second look. After a moment, his expression darkens. "Damn, you're right." Carter nods. "We need to stop them before it's too late. But you know O'Brien won't listen to me." Tom sighs, running a hand through his hair as he glances over at O'Brien, who's still barking orders and growing more agitated by the second. "I'll talk to him," Tom says, "but I don't know if he'll listen." As Tom approaches O'Brien, Carter watches closely. The foreman starts speaking to O'Brien, gesturing toward the beams and explaining the situation as carefully as possible. O'Brien's reaction is immediate. He turns red with anger, his voice rising as he dismisses Tom's concerns. "I'm the engineer here, Tom, not you, and certainly not Carter. I know what I'm doing. We're on a tight schedule, and I'm not about to delay this entire project because some worker thinks he's an expert in structural engineering." Tom tries to argue, but O'Brien cuts him off. "Get back to work. I'm not wasting any more time on this nonsense." Carter watches the exchange, his jaw tightening. He can see the disaster unfolding in real time, but with O'Brien refusing to listen, there's little he can do, at least, not directly. He returns to his station, keeping a close eye on the beam as it's lowered into place. The sense of dread in his gut only grows stronger. For the rest of the afternoon, Carter works in silence, but his mind is on the mistake that's now been locked into the structure. He knows it's only a matter of time before the weight of the building pushes that error to its breaking point. The thought haunts him, but there's nothing more he can do for now. As the day draws to a close, the crew begins to pack up their tools. O'Brien leaves the site without a second thought, confident in his decisions and oblivious to the ticking time bomb he's created. Carter stays behind for a few extra minutes, staring up at the towering steel framework. He's made a choice to remain silent for now, but he knows that eventually, the truth will come to light. And when it does, it won't just be O'Brien's arrogance that's exposed. It will be the consequences of allowing ego to override expertise. The next few days pass with an uneasy calm on the site. The mistake O'Brien made with the steel beams sits heavy on Carter's mind, but with no immediate consequences, the routine of the work continues. Yet, beneath the surface, something has shifted. The workers, especially those closest to Carter, notice the subtle tension in his posture and the way he carefully observes everything happening around him. They sense that something is brewing, though they don't know what. O'Brien, still oblivious to the gravity of his error, continues to strut around the construction site with the same arrogance. He's back to criticizing Carter at every opportunity, his taunts growing more personal. "Still think you're smarter than me, Carter?" he sneers one afternoon, after watching Carter quietly review a set of plans. "Or are you just trying to look busy?" Carter doesn't rise to the bait, as usual. He simply nods and continues his work, but inside, he's more resolute than ever. O'Brien has no idea what's coming. As the project nears a critical deadline, the company's executives arrive for an on-site review. It's a high-stakes visit. These executives control the contracts, the future of the project, and everyone knows that any sign of delay or mismanagement could have serious repercussions. The workers go about their tasks with heightened focus, trying to present a seamless operation. O'Brien, of course, positions himself as the star of the show. He guides the executives around the site, speaking in his usual commanding tone, highlighting progress and downplaying any potential issues. Carter, meanwhile, works quietly in the background, observing everything. He's waiting for the right moment. As the executives conclude their tour, the lead executive, a tall, well-dressed man in his late 50s named Mr. Daniels, pulls O'Brien aside for a private conversation. O'Brien, puffed up with self-importance, starts to speak about the project's progress, emphasizing his role in keeping everything on track. But then, unexpectedly, Mr. Daniels asks, "Where is James Carter?" O'Brien's expression falters for a moment. "Carter? He's just one of the laborers. Nothing special. Why do you ask?" Mr. Daniels's face remains unreadable, but his tone is firm. "I'd like to speak with him." Confusion flickers across O'Brien's face. He's not used to the executives paying any attention to the workers, especially someone like Carter. Nevertheless, he motions toward where Carter is working, and Mr. Daniels strides over. The rest of the crew watches from a distance as the executive approaches Carter, who straightens up and wipes the sweat from his brow. Mr. Daniels greets him with a firm handshake. "Mr. Carter," he says, his voice respectful, "I believe it's time we have a conversation." O'Brien stands a few feet away, his face growing more puzzled by the second. He steps closer, straining to hear what's being said, but Mr. Daniels keeps his voice low. After a brief exchange, Carter nods, and the two men begin walking toward the site office. Now, O'Brien is visibly agitated. He hurries after them, his frustration clear. "What's going on?" he demands, catching up to them. "Why are you talking to Carter? He's just a laborer." Mr. Daniels stops and turns to face O'Brien, his expression hardening. "You seem to have misunderstood something, Mr. O'Brien. James Carter is not just a laborer. He's a senior inspector for our corporate oversight team. He was placed here to evaluate not only the progress of the construction, but also the conduct of those responsible for managing the site." O'Brien's face goes pale. "What?" he stammers, struggling to comprehend. "He's what?" Carter, standing next to Mr. Daniels, meets O'Brien's shocked gaze with calm composure. For the first time, O'Brien is speechless. Mr. Daniels continues, his voice carrying a weight that silences the surrounding workers. "Mr. Carter was sent here to evaluate the overall efficiency of the project, as well as the professionalism and ethical conduct of the team. That includes how the management treats its workforce." O'Brien's jaw tightens, a flicker of panic flashing in his eyes. "There's been some misunderstanding. But Mr. Daniels cuts him off. "No misunderstanding, O'Brien. I've been briefed on the situation. Mr. Carter's reports have been detailed, and quite frankly, we've seen more than enough. We've had concerns about the culture on this site for a while now, and Mr. Carter has confirmed those suspicions." For the first time, the entire site seems to go still. The workers, overhearing the exchange, can barely contain their surprise. Whispers ripple through the crew as they realize that Carter wasn't just another laborer. He had been watching everything. He was the one in charge of reporting to the executives, the one who held real power, all while maintaining a humble facade. O'Brien's face flushes red with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I didn't know. I didn't." "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask," Carter finally speaks, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything he's held back for weeks. "You were too busy assuming, judging, and mistreating people who were doing their jobs. And in doing so, you made the mistake that will cost you." O'Brien glares at Carter, the reality of the situation dawning on him. His career, his reputation, everything is suddenly in jeopardy. His mind races, searching for a way out, but there's nothing he can do now. The truth is out. Mr. Daniels turns back to Carter, his tone now one of respect and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. Your work here is done. We'll take it from here." Carter nods, giving O'Brien one final look before walking away with Mr. Daniels toward the site office. O'Brien stands frozen, watching as everything he thought he controlled slips out of his grasp. As word spreads across the construction site, the workers begin to process what's just happened. Many of them exchange glances, a sense of vindication washing over them. Carter, the man they had silently respected, had been the one holding the cards all along. And now, justice was about to be served. For O'Brien, the reckoning has just begun. O'Brien stands in the middle of the construction site, still reeling from the revelation. His face, once flushed with anger, is now drained of color as the weight of the situation sinks in. The workers, who had once feared him, now watch from a distance, their murmured conversations barely masking the palpable shift in the atmosphere. No one steps forward to offer O'Brien any support. His reign of arrogance and cruelty has finally met its match. Inside the site office, Carter sits across from Mr. Daniels, their conversation hushed but focused. O'Brien paces outside, unable to stand still, trying to process how everything spiraled out of control. His mind races, looking for an explanation, a justification, anything that might salvage his crumbling career. After what feels like an eternity, Mr. Daniels steps out of the office and signals for O'Brien to join them. O'Brien hesitates for a moment before walking in, his jaw set in a mixture of defiance and panic. He enters the small office, where Carter is seated, calm and composed, a sharp contrast to the anxiety that now radiates from O'Brien. Mr. Daniels closes the door behind him, creating a confined space filled with tension. "Mr. O'Brien," Mr. Daniels begins, his tone formal but edged with finality. We've received a full report from Mr. Carter regarding your conduct on this site. While we appreciate the technical expertise you've brought to this project, your behavior toward the workers, especially toward Mr. Carter, is unacceptable. O'Brien can barely contain his frustration. You don't understand, he blurts out. I didn't know who he was. He never told me. If I had known. Carter, who had been silent up until this point, finally speaks. His voice is calm, but there's a firmness to his words that commands attention. Who I am shouldn't matter, O'Brien. Whether I'm an inspector or just another worker, you had no right to treat me, or anyone else, the way you did. It's not about my title. It's about respect. O'Brien shifts uncomfortably in his seat, but his anger flares up again. I was just doing my job. You were working too slow, making mistakes. I had to keep the project moving. Carter's eyes narrow slightly, his patience clearly being tested. There's a difference between managing a team and humiliating people, and you crossed that line the moment you made it personal. You didn't criticize my work. You criticized me. You used your position to belittle me and others, thinking no one would call you out. But the truth is, you were the one making mistakes. Big ones. At this, O'Brien's posture stiffens, and he glances at Mr. Daniels, hoping for some support, but none comes. Instead, Mr. Daniels turns to Carter, inviting him to elaborate. Carter, never one to shy away from the truth, begins recounting the critical error O'Brien had made with the steel beams. A mistake that, if left uncorrected, could have led to a structural failure and endangered the lives of everyone on site. The beam placement is off, Carter explains, his voice measured. The alignment doesn't match the specifications in the original plans. It might hold for now, but once the building starts bearing weight, it's only a matter of time before it fails. And when that happens, it won't just be a setback, it could be a disaster. O'Brien's face pales further as the implications of his mistake hit him. He knows Carter is right, and suddenly, his pride and arrogance feel like small shields against the gravity of what could have happened. I didn't realize, he stammers, his bravado evaporating. I was under pressure, trying to keep everything on schedule. Mr. Daniels' voice cuts in, cold and sharp. We're all under pressure, O'Brien. But pressure is no excuse for negligence or for treating people the way you have. Your actions jeopardize this project, not just technically but ethically. And that is something we cannot overlook. O'Brien leans forward, desperation creeping into his voice. I can fix it. I'll make sure the beams are corrected. I'll work overtime, whatever it takes. Just give me another chance. Carter watches him carefully, and for the first time, there's a flicker of pity in his eyes. But he knows that this is about more than just one mistake. It's not just the beams, Carter says quietly. It's the way you've treated everyone on this site. You've created a toxic environment where people are afraid to speak up, afraid to question you. And that's why this mistake happened in the first place, because no one felt safe enough to tell you when you were wrong. O'Brien slumps back in his chair, the weight of Carter's words hitting him like a physical blow. He had spent so long building up his authority, using fear and intimidation as his tools, that he hadn't realized how fragile his position had become. Now, in this moment, he sees the full scope of the damage he's caused, not just to the project, but to the people who work alongside him. Mr. Daniels stands up, signaling that the meeting is coming to an end. We'll be conducting a full review of your conduct and the errors that occurred under your supervision, he says, his voice leaving no room for argument. But for now, you're relieved of your duties. Pack up your things. You'll be hearing from us soon. O'Brien doesn't argue. He knows there's nothing left to say. With a defeated nod, he stands, casting one last glance at Carter. There's no anger left in his eyes, only resignation. He walks out of the office, the door closing softly behind him. For a moment, the room is silent. Carter remains seated, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Daniels turns to him, his tone softening. You handled yourself well, Mr. Carter. Thank you for your professionalism and for bringing this situation to light. Carter stands and offers a respectful nod. I was just doing my job, sir, making sure things are done right. As Carter steps out of the office, he's greeted by the sight of the workers, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and relief. The tension that had once gripped the site begins to dissipate, replaced by a newfound sense of justice. Carter walks among them, no longer just a quiet observer, but someone who had fought for their dignity. O'Brien may have left, but the lessons learned that day would stay with the crew for a long time. They now understood the power of respect, and that even in the harshest environments, the truth eventually comes to light. For Carter, this was never about revenge or victory. It was about making things right, for himself and for everyone else who had been silently enduring. As he walks away from the site, Carter knows that this chapter is over, but the work continues. There will always be people like O'Brien, and there will always be people like Carter, people who stand up, not with fists or fury, but with quiet strength and integrity. The news of O'Brien's removal spreads quickly throughout the site. By the time the workers gather the next morning, the atmosphere has shifted dramatically. The oppressive weight of fear that had lingered over the crew has lifted, replaced with a quiet sense of vindication. For weeks, they had endured O'Brien's constant scrutiny and arrogance, watching in silence as he targeted Carter. Now, justice had been served. As Carter arrives at the site, several workers nod in his direction, their unspoken respect clear. Luis, one of the older laborers, walks up to him and offers a firm handshake. "You did it, man," he says, his voice heavy with relief. "We've all been watching, and I just wanted to say thank you. You stood up when none of us could." Carter, ever humble, nods. "I wasn't alone. We all saw what was happening. I just did what needed to be done." He doesn't bask in the moment. This isn't about glory or revenge for him. It's about setting things right. But the gratitude in the eyes of his co-workers speaks volumes, and Carter knows that O'Brien's departure has changed more than just the daily routine. It's shifted the culture of the site. Meanwhile, O'Brien's world begins to unravel. Later that day, word comes down from the corporate office. O'Brien has been suspended, pending a full investigation. The error with the steel beams, combined with the documentation of his abusive behavior, has put his career in jeopardy. It's not just about his treatment of Carter anymore. It's about the dangerous precedent he set by creating a toxic environment where no one felt safe speaking up. The company's legal team begins combing through every decision O'Brien made, and it becomes clear that the consequences won't stop at a simple suspension. Inside his small apartment, O'Brien sits at his kitchen table, staring blankly at the suspension letter in front of him. His phone buzzes with messages, former colleagues, confused and shocked, asking what happened, but he doesn't respond. For the first time in his career, O'Brien feels powerless. The bravado and arrogance that had once shielded him are gone, replaced by a cold reality. He had brought this on himself. It's not just the suspension that haunts him. It's the realization that his treatment of Carter and the other workers was not only unprofessional but morally wrong. He had allowed his own insecurities and prejudices to dictate how he managed, never stopping to think about the impact of his words and actions. Now, the price for that is clear. Back at the construction site, the corporate team takes immediate action to correct the mistake O'Brien made with the steel beams. Under Carter's careful supervision, the alignment is adjusted, and the potential disaster is averted. The crew works efficiently, buoyed by the sense that, for the first time in a long while, they are being listened to. It's a small victory, but one that means the world to the workers who had lived under O'Brien's reign. A few days later, the corporate office sends a formal notice. O'Brien has been officially terminated. The letter, sent to the entire team, cites his failure to adhere to the company's standards of professionalism and his critical mistake in managing the structural integrity of the project. His name is now tarnished in the industry, and it will be difficult, if not impossible, for him to find another position of authority anytime soon. For Carter, this outcome is no cause for celebration, but it's a necessary step in restoring integrity to the site. O'Brien's downfall wasn't just about personal justice. It was about ensuring that the culture of fear and intimidation he fostered would no longer endanger the workers or the project itself. As the weeks pass, the site begins to thrive again. The workers feel more empowered to speak up about concerns, knowing they won't be ridiculed or punished for doing so. The new site manager, someone handpicked by the corporate office after Carter's recommendations, fosters a collaborative atmosphere. Problems are addressed quickly, and respect is at the forefront of every interaction. Carter, though still quiet and humble, becomes a trusted figure on the site. His reputation as a worker who stands up for what's right, regardless of the consequences, earns him the respect of both his peers and the higher-ups. One evening, after the workday has ended, Carter sits alone at a nearby diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He's reflecting on everything that's happened, the weeks of tension, the final confrontation with O'Brien, and the aftermath. As he stirs his coffee, he's interrupted by a familiar voice. "Mind if I join you?" It's Luis, one of the older workers from the site. Carter smiles and gestures for him to sit. Luis slides into the booth across from him, letting out a sigh as he does. "It's been a hell of a few weeks, huh?" Carter chuckles. "You could say that." Luis shakes his head in disbelief. "You know, most guys wouldn't have done what you did. O'Brien had us all scared. But you stood up to him, and you did it the right way. Didn't let him get to you, didn't fight fire with fire. You just waited him out. I've got to say, I respect that." Carter shrugs, his humility as constant as ever. "It wasn't easy, but I knew that fighting back in the way he wanted would only make things worse. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is stay quiet and let the truth come out on its own." Luis nods thoughtfully. "Still, not many people would have had the patience. You taught us all something about how to handle people like O'Brien and about the power of staying calm, even when everything's pushing you to explode." Carter sips his coffee, allowing the moment to sink in. For him, it was never about being a hero. It was about doing the right thing in a difficult situation. But hearing Luis's words makes him realize the impact his actions have had, not just on the project, but on the people around him. As Luis stands to leave, he places a hand on Carter's shoulder. "You made a real difference, Carter. Don't ever forget that." Carter watches as Luis exits the diner, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He finishes his coffee and steps outside into the cool evening air, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. He knows that the consequences for O'Brien were necessary, not just for the integrity of the project, but for the respect and dignity of everyone who worked there. As he walks back toward his car, the sun setting in the distance, Carter allows himself a rare smile. The battle was over, and in the end, it wasn't won with anger or retaliation, but with patience, integrity, and the quiet confidence that justice would prevail. With O'Brien removed and the construction site transformed into a place of respect, the project progresses smoothly. Carter, now a figure of admiration among his colleagues, reflects on how the toxic environment has changed for the better. The company recognizes Carter's leadership and integrity, offering him a permanent role in their corporate oversight team. Though humbled, Carter hesitates, preferring to stay hands-on in the field. Mr. Daniels assures him the role would still involve fieldwork, allowing him to bridge the gap between management and workers. Back at the site, the crew celebrates the completion of the building's framework. The once tense, oppressive environment is now filled with camaraderie and mutual respect. Tom, the foreman, acknowledges Carter's influence, noting that his actions taught the team that how they treat one another is just as important as the work itself. The workers feel a newfound sense of pride and ownership over the project. As the final steel beam is secured, Carter steps away to reflect on the journey. The challenges with O'Brien had tested not only his patience but his character, and he takes solace in knowing he never compromised his integrity. The towering skyscraper stands as a testament to perseverance and justice, symbolizing the victory of doing what's right over succumbing to anger or fear. Carter is ready for whatever comes next, knowing that there will always be challenges, but also the opportunity to stand for what is just. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and watch this next story. It's really thrilling.